why ERP is dying, and why it's time to rethink, rip, and replace ERP. Those are just a couple of the topics we're going to cover here in episode 229 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 229. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that provides software selection, implementation planning, and implementation services to our clients going through digital transformations throughout the world. And this is the podcast that covers everything tech-agnostic related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this episode.
Yeah, it's a very controversial episode. Hopefully, it sparks a lot of conversation here because we're going to hone in on this whole thread throughout the episode today of why ERP software might be dying. And we're not here to be totally anti-ERP in this episode, but we are here to challenge the status quo and to really get the audience thinking about what some of your options are beyond the traditional monolithic usual ERP software vendor suspects. So in other words, if you're going through a digital transformation, it's not necessarily just about SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft anymore. Now there's a lot of other options out there. There's tier 2 ERP system providers. There's platforms. There's composable ERP. There's low-code, no-code development platforms, third-party developed solutions on platforms, all kinds of different options, so much so that it can be confusing and overwhelming in some cases. And the easy answer might be just to say, let's just go with one vendor and call it good. But the whole point here today is to talk about some of the trade-offs and risks of that approach and what some of the other options and alternatives might be. So that's the goal here today. We want to really dive into and unpack what the options are beyond the traditional monolithic ERP systems. So we'll start off the conversation here today with some social media questions. We'll get into a couple of newsworthy topics. One in particular is it time to rethink the rip and replace ERP model, which is very relevant to today's conversation. And then we'll also get into black holes and lost data, how ERP doesn't have to be chaos. And then after that, we're going to bring Greg Benton to the show. And Greg is our Chief Strategy Officer here at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to join me in a conversation about ERP is dead, or is ERP software dead? What are the alternatives ERP software that you might consider here in 2025 and beyond? And then later in the show, the last segment, I'll get into a discussion I had recently about why I hate traditional ERP systems. So it may sound like we're being anti-ERP here today, but really, again, think of it from the context of let's challenge the status quo. Let's look at our options. Let's look objectively at the pros and cons of ERP systems versus other options out there in the marketplace. So that's the whole gist of what we want to cover here today. But before we get into some of the guests and other conversations we have, what are some of the social media topics and questions we've received here recently, Darian?
Yeah, a couple of good social media questions here. This first one is, how long should a change readiness assessment take to complete? And do organizations request this as a standalone service?
Great question. And yes, they do request it as a standalone service. So we oftentimes get clients who will come to us and say, can you do a change readiness assessment? For those that don't know or haven't heard the term or aren't familiar, a change readiness assessment is really a way to agnostically and independently and objectively assess your organization, your culture, your leadership style, your communication style, and understand and proactively anticipate where the pockets of resistance might come from within an organization. And it's easy to go into these projects and think that there's not going to be any resistance because people are so excited for the new technology and they're so frustrated with the old technology. And they're all telling me what I want to hear as an executive. They're telling me that, yep, we're excited. We can't wait. We see the possibilities, et cetera, et cetera. And that's true on the surface. But the problem is, as the project goes on, that excitement quickly fades And oftentimes, more often than not, it shifts from excitement into frustration, uncertainty, and doubt, which leads to resistance to change. And so a good organizational readiness assessment will proactively identify where those pitfalls are. It's almost like, you're going out to a combat field and you're identifying where the pitfalls are, or the landmines. You want to see where the landmines are and know how you're going to go around the landmines, make sure you don't walk right through them. And what happens too often is organizations don't do an organizational readiness assessment. They hear all the stuff they want to hear, which is people are excited. They assume change management is going to be not that difficult. And then they end up stepping on the landmines along the way. And so the job of this assessment is to really identify what sorts of resistance there might be and what might cause that resistance and what are the root causes and solutions that we could pursue to address those. So that's what an organizational assessment is. We'll do that as a standalone for some clients. Most clients will have a start there, and then we'll continue to help them define their digital or their change management strategy and actually help them execute the change management plan. But the time it takes is really not that long. I mean, it's something we typically do in anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to, in some cases, it might take 2 to 3 months. But for a larger multinational organization, it might take a little bit long on the high side of that range. But it really doesn't take that long. It doesn't take a lot of effort or cost, but it has a huge amount of value because it sort of lays out the battlefield, if you will, from a change perspective and helps you understand where those risks are from a people perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. This next question today is, what if the real reason we skip root cause analysis isn't because it's hard, but because it forces us to confront what we'd rather ignore?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I sort of agree with that. I guess that's, in some cases that's true that a lot of organizations don't want to acknowledge the underlying root causes of issues. I did a YouTube video recently, and I'm not sure if this is where the comment came from, but on YouTube, I put a whiteboard video up there where I'm actually doing a root cause analysis of what causes failure and sort of differentiating between the symptoms that people often blame for failure and then getting to the root causes of what actually causes those symptoms and hopefully getting people to focus on, go after the root causes. Don't just try and fix the symptoms. But I think the reason I hesitated to answer that question a little bit is because more often than not, I'd say most of the clients that we work with, it's just that they don't know. They see the symptoms and they want to go attack the symptoms. I don't think it's that they're afraid necessarily of the root causes. It's that they don't understand what the root causes are. So that's a big part of what we do, is really try to peel back the layers of the onion to get to the heart of what the real challenges are. So we're addressing the root cause rather than just the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great questions though, from social media and audience. If you have any questions, be sure to comment it anywhere on this podcast or on Eric or Third Stage channels, anywhere. You'll maybe be selected to have your question answered on one of these podcasts sometime. So definitely ask those questions in the comments. But we're going to switch into our first newsworthy article of the day, which is the ERP black holes. This is kind of a headline that every ERP leader should pay attention to. So Gartner still reports that more than 70% of ERP initiatives fail to meet their intended objectives. I mean, that's a huge amount, especially when you remember disasters like SPAR's $88 million SAP project collapse. What's even more alarming is that the core problem isn't about the software itself. It's about the chaos inside organizations. According to CIO Africa, data black holes, where no one owns the data, accountability is missing, and decision-making is built on shaky ground, are what causes these ERP projects to turn into massive money pits. They argue that failures happen not because ERP platforms can't deliver value, but because organizations don't have the governance, ownership, and the transparency to steer these powerful tools. And that means no matter how advanced your ERP is, if you can't align people, data, and processes, you're headed straight for a black hole. Eric, with this, why do you think ERP projects often spin out of control? Is it leadership, flawed execution? What are some major keys that play into it?
Yeah, great question, great points. It is somewhat of a black hole that these projects end up leading into. But I think the root causes are, sort of ties back to the social media question we just covered a moment ago. But I think the real causes of failure and why these projects spiral out of control is typically it starts with not having a clear plan. A lot of times organizations just rush in, they They hire or select a vendor, contract with the software provider. They contract with the big consulting system integrator, tech consulting firm to design and build the software. And the Army just starts rolling without a clear battle plan. And the smarter organizations, the more effective organizations, take the time to do more of a phase zero, where they have a proper blueprint and understanding of what they want their processes to be, so that they can use that blueprint to drive the software vendor and the implementers rather than the other way around. Now, the software vendors and implementers will say, yeah, we do blueprints, but they're doing it more from the perspective of, we just need answers to design and build software. Whereas, so they need to blueprint the software. You need to blueprint your organization, and you need the two to match, and you need the blueprint for the organization, the business blueprint. You need that to drive the technology blueprint that your software vendor and your system integrator is going to work on. And too many organizations miss that really important point, that really important connection. And then they wonder why, we did a blueprint. I thought we did the implementation planning and the upfront design. Yeah, you did, but you did it to design software that works, not to design a set of business processes and technologies that work for your organization. So those are two very different things. So that planning phase up front is very important, which leads to a second important cause of failure and challenges, which is unrealistic expectations. Too many times organizations think, well, the vendor proposed a 24-month implementation timeline, so it's going to be 24 months. But the reality is, when they put together these proposals, they don't know. I mean, they're basing it on what they think might happen in a perfect world, but they don't know your culture. They don't know how big of a change it's going to be for your business processes and your people. They don't know what your culture is like. There's all these different variables that factor into the implementation time frame, and they're focused more on how long is it going to take us to design and build software, whereas your focus should be how long is it going to take to go through a true business change, a true business transformation that delivers real business value. So those are, again, two very different things that you need to make sure you differentiate between and plan accordingly for. And then I'd say the third big thing that companies miss out on is, again, tied back to one of the earlier social media questions around change management, change readiness, but not having a solid change management strategy and plan, and not starting change management soon enough is a root cause, another root cause of failure, from our opinion, or in our opinion, which leads to a common symptom that I'll mention the symptom only because research shows it's the number one cause of time and budget overruns, and that is decision latency. So decision latency means that organizations take longer to make decisions, and that's what slows the project down. It's not that your tech providers can't design and build fast enough. It's because you can't make decisions fast enough on what you want to be when you grow up, which, again, that's a symptom. But if you go back to why that is, it's because you didn't do the implementation planning up front. You didn't do that business blueprint up front in that phase zero to have that clarity, so that not every single decision is made already, but the major decisions are already made. The major time intensive decisions are made before the army of technical providers start to show up and the meter starts running. So I bring up that one symptom because that's an example of how that symptom ties back to a root cause that you need to address.
For sure. And this all kind of sparks the question for me of, Eric, in a real world example, have you seen like a project where governance and visibility really saved the day for the project, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I've neglected to mention governance, which was really the whole crux of your question and the article it's that you're talking about here. But yes, the governance can save the day, but I would say governance, you don't want to use project governance as a way to fix a problem. You can, but if you put governance in place early on in phase zero, during that implementation planning phase zero phase that I was talking about, you're doing a lot of things in that phase. You should be doing not just the business blueprint I talked about, but it's also defining your change strategy, your architecture strategy, your decommissioning strategy for your different systems, how you're going to integrate multiple systems, what the overall detailed plan is, what the resource plan is for you internally. And then also, not last but not least, is the project governance. What is the overall program management plan going to look like? What are the controls you're going to put in place for how decisions are made, and how you manage scope and time and budget and all that stuff? So that's all really important to get in place up front. Now, if you're already in the midst of a project and you haven't done it, it's better late than never. But now you're playing catch up and you're more on defense, trying to clean stuff up, which, if that's where you are, that's just the reality of it, and that's okay. But if you have time to influence it and change it, do it earlier. Do that program management up front. And that's a big part of what clients hire us to do, is to come in and be an extension of their internal PMO and helping them get the governance and controls in place so that they can manage the overall project. They can manage the vendors, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of slide into our next newsworthy article, which is kind of on the same topic in a way, but something that has been a trend or a big trend in the ERP world for the past years here, and that's been the standard advice of rip out your old system and replace it from scratch. But really, this article is questioning, is that really the smartest way to modernize anymore? According to this insight from Next World, this rip and replace mindset might actually be setting organizations up for more pain than progress. They argue that there's a better way and that you need to think of your ERP as a core that you can extend rather than demolish. Instead of wiping everything clean, the idea is to add modern platforms on top of your existing ERP. That lets you move faster, protect the processes you've already built, and experiment with things like AI or Internet of Things without starting from zero. Plus, with low code and no code tools, you can even empower non-technical teams to build workflows and apps themselves, which sounds way less painful than a giant multi-year replacement project. So basically, it's a layered modernization approach, that keeps the works, enhance what doesn't work, and then gives yourself a flexible and future-ready foundation. Eric, when should leaders really consider like a rip and replace versus when should they build on top instead? Or what is kind of your opinion on all this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big dilemma. It's something we are going to unpack in more detail with our guest today, with Greg Benton here after the next break. But in the interim, I'll give you sort of a summary response, and that is, first of all, if you talk to software vendors, ERP software vendors in particular, they're going to tell you, oh, absolutely, you need to rip and replace because that's the way you get innovation. If you rip out the old system, put in a new one, now you've got cloud-enabled, AI-driven functionality, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's true, but that is a lot of pain to go through, and it takes a lot of time and money before you ever get to the point of thinking about innovation. So I like to think of it as like, two phases or two layers of a transformation. You've got your sort of your system of record that you're replacing. It's just sort of like just keeping the lights on, having your data, giving your data a place to live, having basic workflows in place, just being able to run the business at a basic level. That's sort of, I'll consider that all system of record. But then system of innovation is where you start thinking, okay, how can we now use AI to make our jobs easier and better? How can we use analytics, advanced analytics? How can we, how can we use some advanced supply chain functionality that we're not taking advantage of now? You need, in one way, you do need that system of record as a base before you can build on that system of innovation or the innovative processes. But the question becomes, do you really need to do that all through your ERP provider? And do you need to go through the pain of ripping out your back office system of record when you could potentially just be looking at other solutions that give you value on what you already have? And basically, whether it's just an interim solution or whether it's a long-term solution, it's still the same point, which is you have to look at the risk reward and cost benefit. For example, if it's going to cost you, if you're using an old legacy system like SAP ECC or Microsoft Dynamics AX or Oracle EBS or whatever it is. Let's just say you're using an older legacy system. Let's just say it's not a terribly outdated system. If you're on an AS400 or like a green screen still, this does not apply, because in that case, I'd say, yeah, you probably need to get off that and get somewhere in the 21st century, and not be stuck in the 20th century. But assuming where most companies are is they've got systems that have been around for, say, 10 to 20 years. And in most cases, they're not ideal, but they're not broken per se in many cases. But there's a lot of benefit that they're not getting, or a lot of technological value that they're not taking advantage of because they've got these older systems. So that's where you start thinking, well, what if we leave those systems in place, short-term, long-term, whatever, and then we add other platforms or interoperability tools or AI tools that leverage what we have and get immediate value. And that's what a lot of our clients, more and more of our clients are starting to do that, to say, we're going to do ERP, but we're going to wait 3 or 5 years and we're going to sort of flip the script here. And we're going to get immediate value on modern technology without going through tens of millions of dollars, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars to replace that back office system that's not really going to deliver a huge amount of business value. So I think just being agnostic, objective, rational, non-emotional, don't get caught up in the whole, but our system's outdated. We're not in the latest and greatest cloud system. We've got technical debt, or, Gartner says that we should do this because, the vendors all sponsored they commissioned a report for Gartner to say they should do this. So you've got to sort of read that stuff, pay attention to it, but don't bet your career on that stuff, because it's very biased stuff that you're getting from the industry. And just do what's right for you and look objectively at what the cost benefit is. It could be that it's a lower cost and potentially lower, it could be lower business value overall, but it might be a higher ROI actually, because your cost and risk is much lower if you just go with more of an incremental improvement to what you have. And it may be that, it buys you some time to kick the can down the road, and maybe 3 or 5 years from now, you start thinking about, okay, now that we've got this value out of this top layer of interoperability or AI or whatever, now we can think about ripping out our old system and replacing it, because we're going to have to eventually. So that's the way I'd look at it.
Yeah. And this also kind of makes me question, have you seen these platform on top strategies succeed in the real world, and what makes or breaks that strategy?
Yeah, we have seen it work. And, I think the key is that you have to have technology that's modern enough to deliver value. Again, if you're, working off a really old iSeries or AS400 mainframe green screen system, and a lot of you listening may not even know what that means, which is okay, because you don't really need to know what it means, because it's going away and it's obsolete. But some companies use really old systems from the 80s and 90s. They're still using those technologies. In those cases, you probably need to upgrade, because that technology is eventually going to break, and you're not going to be able to find anyone in the world that can support it. I hate to say it, I don't want to sound too crass or insensitive, but a lot of these people are dying. Like, people are dying off. That the last of the people that know some of these technologies are literally dying. So it's like, well, you're not training a new generation of kids to learn these old technologies. Eventually, no one's going to be able to support it. So you do have to, at some point, upgrade. So I think that's the way to consider it. And so if you, assuming you're not in that boat though, and you've got let's call it a semi-modern / semi-outdated system that's 10 or 20 years old, chances are pretty high you've got, as long as your data is solid, and that's a big if, because a lot of companies don't have good data, even with more modern systems. But as long as you've got good data, or you at least get it cleaned up, and as long as you've got a clear strategy to how you're going to do it, doing this interoperability AI layer on top can be very powerful. And that's why companies like Palantir and Snowflake, Databricks, for example, if you follow those 3 companies, they're doing so well right now, because they're taking advantage of the fact that so many companies don't want to, or they can't. Maybe they don't have the budget or the time or the resources to rip out their ERP systems and replace it. So Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, and others are giving these customers lifelines to say, hey, here's another option. Here's a way you can get value and improve your technology stack without necessarily having to spend millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great points for sure. And I know we're going to dive more into it here with our guests. So I'm really excited to see what you guys are going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll have Greg Benton on the show, who's been on this podcast several times before. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Third Stage Consulting. We're going to talk about whether or not ERP software is dead. So we're going to get into what the alternatives to monolithic ERP systems are, what we think the future of ERP software is, and really have hopefully a open and healthy debate around this topic. So we'll love to hear your comments along the way as we go. So we'll take a quick break. We'll get into that. And then later I'll talk about why I hate ERP systems and what some of the dark sides of ERP systems are, which may sound strange coming from someone who's been in the ERP consulting space for 25 years. But there are certain things I really don't like about ERP software. And my goal is not to convince you not to implement ERP, but my goal is to make sure you understand what the dark side are and what the trade-offs and the risks are that you're giving up, because those are very real and you just need to know what they are. So we're going to get into all that here in just a moment, but first we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I'm excited to announce release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 229. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including strategy, people, process, and technology and strategy. You can find new episodes of this show every week by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent and tech-agnostic provider of consulting services to companies that are going through digital transformations, including ERP implementations and other sorts of transformations, AI, ERP, CRM, supply chain management, et cetera, et cetera. So be sure to check us out at thirdstage-consulting.com. And I'm excited for our next guest here. Today, we're going to talk about whether or not ERP software is dead. And this has been a bold headline for years now, probably over a decade. People have been speculating whether or not ERP software is going to die. I think we're closer now than we have been in the past to it potentially dying, or at least becoming less relevant in the enterprise tech space. I don't think it's going to die anytime soon, but the question is, will it die eventually, or is it dying as we speak? So that's all the stuff we want to get into here today. And to help us unpack this conversation here today is Greg Benton, our Chief Strategy Officer at Third Stage Consulting. So Greg, thanks for being here today.
Good to see you this morning, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. And this is a really fun discussion because it's always fun to challenge the status quo and think outside the box and think about, what are we potentially missing? What are those blind spots or options we have in our digital strategies and ways we move forward? But before we dive into jumping into understanding whether or not ERP software is dead and having a healthy conversation, healthy debate about that, maybe with the audience as well, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Third Stage.
Well, I'm, as the Chief Strategy Officer, leveraging about 25 years implementing, developing strategies and blueprints around primarily ERP, but also all of the edge solutions that surround core ERP, right? So the e-commerce systems, CRM, warehouse management systems, workforce management systems. And all of that time, we've really run into a number of things that cause us to pause at certain points in the course of deploying software systems, and usually that's brought about by technology changes. And we've seen the technology changes coming with hyperscalers being involved with cloud deployments at the major ERP vendors level. And now more recently, we've seen AI come into the picture and really facilitate a lot more interaction, a lot more orchestration of different applications and systems. So there are becoming more and more alternatives to massive universal ERP if you're trying to get to a universal and interoperating data set across your entire enterprise. So we'll be talking about that today. I think this is a great topic.
Yeah, it is. And apparently we've already struck a nerve or struck a chord with the audience here. Oops, I want to get to some of these audience questions here. So one question is from Jonathan, or one comment from Jonathan on YouTube. AI software is most likely going to evolve into ERP or at the least CRM systems, which will be focused on business data. Palantir is a great example of this. Andy on LinkedIn is already chiming in as well. It will always be alive because AI and or machine learning cannot learn without the data ERP provides. I suppose the big question there that we can get into here in a second is, do you need ERP or do you need a new ERP? I guess would be more the question. Do you need a new modern ERP system to provide the data that's needed for AI and machine learning? I think that's the $1 million question for a lot of organizations, especially those that are being sort of forced into the cloud migration path from, SAP, Microsoft, and some of the other big ERP vendors. And that's another thing we want to talk about is give the audience here options and alternatives. So you may have SAP or Microsoft, just as two examples, telling you need to get off the legacy system because we're going to cut off support. But the question becomes, do you really, though? Could you live with a legacy system that isn't maintained if you're just using it as more of a system of record? And then you layer on top, and at least in the interim, maybe some sort of technology that can take advantage of the data you have without the big, massive implementations there. So that's what we'll get into. Here's something we can get into in a moment. This is from Mito on YouTube. Bit confused as to how ERP system fades away and what sort of business application will be replaced. And Mito is watching from the Kingdom of Bahrain. So thank you for being here today. Mito also wants to know, is Oracle Fusion no more valid? Dan says, I think evolving is a better characterization. We all need to process orders and manage manufacturing or a business.
Evolving is right. Yep.
How we process all those data is changing. So great point from Dan on LinkedIn, who is joining us from Chicago. Mech, we know him as well. He's from the Third Stage team, joining from Almost Heaven, West Virginia. So thanks for all the comments so far. Curious to hear from the rest of the audience. Is ERP software dead? Where do you think it's headed? But I guess just to start, just to get us started on this conversation, Greg, why is this even a discussion point? I'm not the first person. We're not the first people to come out and say ERP is dead or, death to ERP, that sort of thing. I mean, that's been going on for years now, but is this all hype? Is this clickbait, or is there real substance to this idea that ERP software as we know it may be dying?
I think it's a little bit of each of those. It's a little bit of hype. It's a little bit of posturing on the part of the systems integrators, frankly, in terms of, ERP is not dead. Look, it's a very symbiotic relationship between the interoperability platforms that are available now. I think Jonathan mentioned Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, some of the others that come to mind, but they cannot replace those core enterprise operations. So finance, supply chain, on and on and on. So is ERP dead? Probably not. It becomes the kind of the living host for that symbiotic data layer that can be placed on top of or as a foundation to a new ERP system. So you think about ERP evolving, as someone said in the chat a little bit earlier, it's evolving into digital enterprise operations, which is really the whole gamut of the core ERP or back office functions, as well as everything that goes on top of that or connects to that. CRM being a big component there, HCM, warehouse management, PLM. I mean, just, an alphabet soup of a spaghetti mix of interactions and interoperability. The new systems that I mentioned actually create a great flexibility in the architecture that can join those disparate sources of information, including reaching out to the Internet of Things, right? IoT, and bringing all of that in so that you can make insightful decisions and really real-time decisions about what's going on with your business. That also allows you to build this foundation, this data foundation, that then you can build on top of that with the properly sequenced new application sets and new processes that you're going to bring to bear as your future operating state comes to fruition. And, that involves a lot of upfront planning, what we call phase 0 in preparation for the organization to move forward as a whole. And, all of those things are contributing to the death of ERP. It's really the evolution of the new digital enterprise operations.
Yeah. And I know back, when you and I were in the industry, maybe 20 years ago, it used to be sort of a faux pas, almost a bad word to talk about middleware integration, customization. Anytime you would talk about any of those things, it was sort of, for the last 10 to 20 years, it's been almost a faux pas to even think about that. But I think now things have changed. The technology has changed, and now it's more viable to, especially with some of these low code, no code options that you have out there. Like when you think of, like Rapid, for example, or even Odoo, even though Odoo's technically an ERP system, it's sort of that low code, no code open source. And then you've got like the Salesforce platform, which a lot of people think of Salesforce as just a CRM system, but it's a whole platform that third-party developers can create other apps on. So you've got all these different options that are sort of hybrids. They're not full on custom dev. They're not full on customizing out of the box software, but it's these more flexible options that can fill in some of the nooks and crannies, or in some cases even replace the need for a full-blown ERP replacement, especially if you just implemented a new ERP system, say 10 years ago. You may not be on the latest and greatest, most modern ERP system, but if it's good enough, if it's modern enough to where you can put cool new technologies on top of that and get more immediate value without the cost and the risk, I think that's what we're talking about here is what are those options? There's certainly trade-offs and risks and costs that you have that going down that path. But I think as part of your digital strategy and road mapping, just to be able to consider those options. How do you see customers reacting to this concept that you're talking about, these different alternatives?
Well, we're seeing more and more the idea that there are, for instance, in the composable ERP or best of breed assessment of many organizations, they're looking at how can I develop something that's going to focus and provide the use cases necessary to run my business in the way that a custom developed application that's running on an AS400 for the last 20 years does. And the way that you can do that is now with a more flexible architecture that's available along with AI in these interoperability systems that you can be putting in place. And so that takes the place of, or at least enables that configuration that's going to match your business needs much more readily than anything that you can change in, the out-of-the-box software that comes with a multi-tenant environment in the current applications from all of the major ERP vendors. So I think it provides so much more flexibility, so much more focus on your business that it's really managing through how are we going to get to a true transformation for our business rather than really just a lift and shift of technology. So is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think companies are starting to think more about, do we need to replace our ERP system just because we need to get to the cloud or because there's more modern technology out there, or is it because there's some sort of business value that we're going to get out of it? And it sounds basic enough. It sounds like a no-brainer, but a lot of companies don't have that clarity of what it is they want to accomplish, and they feel like they have to move this direction that the ERP vendors want them to go. And what we're trying to show is, there's different pivots or different, off ramps that you could take, and on ramps you can take to manage that. Here's an interesting comment from Andy on LinkedIn. Andy says, the other interesting thought is, how will you pass your annual accounting audit? Hard to validate. Sounds like Andy's joining from Austin, Texas, I assume. So that's an interesting point. I mean, obviously you need to make sure your data, your controls are in place. And if you need a new ERP system because you don't have that, then sure, you may need to replace your back office ERP system. But again, assuming you implemented something, say 10 or 15 years ago, and you've got the controls in place, the data is fine, then the question becomes, where's the real value going to be? Is it going to be in upgrading to the latest and greatest ERP, or could it be that there's other options out there, or is it a combination of all the above? Tom,
and if you are going to make that evaluation, shouldn't you be looking at what are the alternatives? So instead of just going to the ERP vendor that you've been working with all the way along and looking at moving to their latest and greatest, should you be looking at other alternatives? Very often it's going to point to staying with, especially your partnered provider that's been around for a long time, that is going to limit change, is going to limit some of the risk involved in moving to a new system. But you should take a look at the new tools that are out there and available for you, especially getting to some rapid time to value. Stakeholders within organizations are looking for more unified data, more insightful and real-time data that they can pull from disparate systems within their organization that have kind of evolved over time, right? And the new tools that are available to you facilitate that. And you can be in a kind of uniform data model within 60 to 90 days rather than a year or two for a full ERP replacement.
Right. Yeah, that kind of leads to you're starting to answer another question I had for you, which is,
sorry.
No, that's right. It's a perfect segue. From your perspective, what are the biggest forces that are or could be driving companies away from traditional monolithic ERP systems? You just talked about, speed to value being one, but are there other trends that you're seeing that are causing clients, and we've got a couple that you and I have talked about where they've sort of put off their ERP initiative and accelerated, move forward other enterprise technology initiatives. But what's driving this? What are some of the other things that are driving that trend?
Well, organizational risk, and also the capital T in transformation really assumes that you're going to change some of those, in many cases, 20, 30-year-old processes that are outdated, that are manual, that are highly risky for the organization. And this will allow you to really just back up a little bit. We get called in many times to restart or re-engineer a quote failed ERP implementation. And in so doing, you have to back up and perform really a phase zero, getting the organization ready for that move, and then reducing risk in the move also, making it so that everyone's on board with the changes that are coming, that are going to be a benefit to them, that are going to be a benefit to the organization from a financial standpoint, and modify some of those old processes so that you're now optimized in the way that your software systems actually control the processes. They actually put a security barrier around the way that those processes work in your organization. And that really is what's driving this look at how can we get started with the interoperability hub, or kind of the mission control as the foundation, and then build on top of that with a composable ERP. So the enterprise systems surround that core. And that's really what people are looking for right now. Reducing risk, reducing cost, and producing some immediate time to value in the reporting and the BI that's available to you within months instead of at the end of the entire process, right?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, makes total sense. And I agree with you. Those are some important drivers that are causing some people to rethink their strategies. Not everyone is going to fit into any one path, but it's again important to know what your options are. Here's a comment from Tom on LinkedIn says, resource planning will never become obsolete. The combination of platforms, technology, software, and business processes involved will continue to undergo constant change and improvement. And then
absolutely agree with that, by the way. I mean, think about the move for ERP vendors to hyperscaling technologies on the computing side, being able to scale to any level, being able to orchestrate different applications and load balancing along the way, right? So that was one area where it took it out of the internal data center, so to speak, and moved it into these multi-tenant cloud platforms. The advent of AI, and I remember that in 2017, Infor, among others, introduced, in their case, Coleman, which was an AI system that allowed for a lot of queries to go on within Infor applications. What's happening now is all of the ERP systems are moving to an AI that's really interchangeable with other systems. So it's moving toward this interoperability platform as well. And they're developing those very rapidly and making it a part of that multi-tenant rollout of their newest technologies. So it is evolving even within those enterprise systems.
Right.
Is the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And here's a comment from X. Someone says, I enjoy ERP Next open source. Another open source alternative to traditional monolithic ERP systems, much like Odoo, but ERP Next is an alternative to Odoo if you're looking for open source types of systems. Tom on LinkedIn really likes your term digital enterprise operations. He says it's an excellent candidate term to replace the increasingly ambiguous term ERP. I think the word
I
ERP,
love that, Tom. You know,
great minds think alike.
EO. If ERP, if anything about ERP is dead, enterprise resource planning as a term that covers, everything, the ubiquitous enterprise systems is dead. Digital enterprise operations is really what we're talking about. And that encompasses kind of the strategy and business case for moving to something new, right? So you're following a blueprint, hopefully, as an organization that takes you through the next 3, 7, and even 10 years in that entire transformation journey. So DEO is a much more apt term for what we're talking about now. Love that.
And I don't know about you, but I'd be okay if we retired the terms ERP and digital transformation for that matter. We use it. We're just
or the digital part of digital transformation, right?
Yeah, just call it transformation or business transformation, or I don't know. There's got to be something better, but DEO might be it. Maybe that's the replacement. I know we've sort of used that increasingly over the years, and we'll see if it catches on here as a new. That's just what we need. Those another buzzword. Then people say, well, DEO is getting overused and it's too ambiguous. We need another term. So, but I think it's a good potential replacement there.
Well, hey, I'm just getting used to using the term cloud. So
right,
yeah.
Right, and soon that'll be obsolete too because everything will be in the cloud. So you won't have to specify that it's cloud because that's just
won't think of it. Yeah,
exactly. Raj on YouTube says AI will more likely evolve as a management tool within ERP initially at level 0. Enterprise resource is a must pillar of any ERP system. Hard to conceive the death of ERP. So I think you're right. I tend to agree with that. I don't think SAP will be dead in 5 years or anything like that. But I do think, my personal opinion is that maybe not so much Oracle or Microsoft just because they're such diversified companies outside of traditional ERP. But I think SAP in particular is at risk of becoming the next Bond. The software that comes and goes, and there's a new incumbent that takes over. Sort of that top spot. I don't think SAP will be there in the long term. It's just my personal opinion that a lot of that's just based on the product, the strategy, the way they pursue their go-to-market, the way the goodwill they're losing in the market right now. I think they remind me of BlackBerry right before Apple came out with the iPhone.
Wow.
It's sort of like the hubris and the arrogance behind, ERP will never die. Our product is amazing. Monolithic ERP, long live monolithic ERP, without recognizing some of these other trends. I think that will lead to the downfall of SAP. But I'd love to hear if anyone agrees or disagrees with me. I'm sure many of you both agree and disagree with me. So I'd love to hear your comments. Will SAP be dead in the future? That's another question for you there. Here's an interesting question, and it's bringing up a really good point that is relevant to this alternative to ERP that we're talking about. This again is from Tom on LinkedIn. Tom says, will dominant ERP players see business opportunity in playing well with others, reversing the trend and temptation to promote vendor lock-in? So let's talk about vendor lock-in. That's a hot topic.
Gosh, Tom is just really hitting it, right?
Tom's on fire. We need Tom on every live stream. Every time we do these live, we need Tom on there just because he's rolling now.
So working with the major ERP vendors, and over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, we've seen a shift that they used to be selling into the marketplace with a go-to-market strategy of implementing a monolithic ERP system and a single ERP system, and adding more of the bolt-ons or edge solutions to that so that people didn't have to go somewhere else. That's really changed over the last couple of years with a number of these ERP vendors that I won't name, because then I'll skip somebody and somebody will get mad at me. But they are playing nicely in the sandbox now. So if you have somebody that's running core financials and supply chain, and they're together in a best of breed solution with, all right, I'll mention one, a Workday HCM solution. Those two used to be kind of combative in terms of wanting to be the single ERP system. Anymore, I think that they actually work together very well. The integration and APIs between the two can be developed with Snowflake, Databricks, or even other systems that come with AWS and Azure. So that best of breed or composable ERP or digital enterprise operations is facilitated by the new tools that are available. And, that is the trend. That is the trend we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like the strategy that some vendors are doing to sort of leverage both, almost like they're sort of in the middle. They are providing this traditional semi-monolithic ERP option, but they're also layering on top of that other option. So I think of like Salesforce, I think has been really good at this over the years. And even now, Microsoft's been good at it with D365. I think NetSuite is starting to catch on to this too. So those are 3 examples right there: NetSuite, Microsoft, and Salesforce. They are all, you could call them semi-traditional ERP or enterprise tech off-the-shelf systems, but they have also built these platforms and the opportunity for third-party developers to create apps on top of their platform. So now you get a core ERP system, but you're not beholden just to that one system. You're not locked in necessarily just to the limitations of that one system. Now you can go to third parties and look at other bolt-ons. And Microsoft's done this forever. They've got the whole ISV
Microsoft model. Is the pioneer.
Yeah. And whereas SAP and to a lesser degree, Oracle have been sort of the other extreme, where it's been more of a closed environment, more of a greenfield, building everything from the ground up, which was a strength for SAP in particular for a long time. But I think it's becoming a liability now in terms of flexibility and adaptation. Now customers are getting too locked into SAP, I think. And we'll see how that unfolds in the coming years. It's a great point from Tom. Another question from X. Question is more of a comment, but I'm curious to hear what you think, Greg. But the comment here is, in my opinion, ERP vendors need to be mindful of pricing themselves out of the market of the future. And it sort of ties into that vendor lock-in thing too. Once you get locked in by the vendor, they can pretty much do whatever they want in these cloud subscription environments as far as price escalations, cost increases, things like that. And I think they'll keep doing it. They'll keep pricing it up until enough customers push back and cry uncle, or whatever the saying is. So what are your thoughts on this? Are
or if enough alternatives are provided. So if we have more of the interoperability platforms that come to the fore, many of the processes that are managed or automated by a single ERP system, or really that monolithic idea, can now be controlled and managed in a bidirectional manner by the interoperability platforms. And so I think they're not going to get maybe priced out of the market, but part of it's going to be deployed out of the market. When you've got a 30, 60, 90-day deployment window for a Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, and I just say those right off the top of my head. That doesn't compare with spending 6 months to a year to 18 months to deploy and put in a new software system. So the cost of the implementation, the time of the implementation, and the time to value is what is going to push them out of the market, or at least push alternatives to the fore, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You look at, we were talking about Odoo and ERP Next. I mean, that's how they burst into the scene, as they took advantage of the fact that the pricing was so expensive and on some of these ERP systems, and they offered a lower cost option. In the case of, I know for a fact Odoo, and I think ERP Next as well, just as two examples, they offer this sort of freemium option where you can actually get your hands on the software. You can try it for free. And then as you add modules or users, then you start paying. But they've sort of disrupted the market in that way. And I think there's other disruptors that are other disruptions happening now, and others that we don't even know about yet that are forthcoming. One thing I want to share with the audience too, just while we're talking about this, is we're talking a lot about trends and where the enterprise tech space is headed and how you should be thinking about your digital strategies. I'm going to include a link or a QR code right here, top left corner of your screen. We'll include the link below in the comments or in the description. But if you want to download our digital transformation report, it's an annual report we publish each year, and it contains a number of industry trends, best practices, just what we're seeing in the industry. And it also contains a number of independent tech agnostic reviews of different software options that are out there. So I highly encourage you to check that out. It's free. You can get it on our website. Just scan the QR code here on the screen and you can get that.
Hey, Eric, while people are there too, please check out the Stratosphere conference that we have coming up in August, the 25th through the 27th in Denver. And that really is an opportunity to get one-on-one discussions going, to meet many of the ERP vendors that will also be there. The only rule is they can't really sell their systems. They have to be talking about what's coming in terms of their technology and roadmaps, right? So getting right to the heart of this whole question about ERP and the evolution into DEO. And there's going to be a lot of that discussion with thought leaders, people like Jan Bond, who are going to be there talking about, I always call Jan the kind of the godfather of ERP, but that tells you the caliber of the people that we will have speaking and interacting at this conference in Denver. So,
yeah, I'll while we're talking here, I'll flash a QR code for that as well in just a moment. Partially because I have to create it here while we're talking, which I'm terrible at multitasking. So let me come back to that. I'll wait till you're talking again, and then I'll create it. But just coming back to the some of the comments here on social media. Dan on LinkedIn says, I like Tom's new name for ERP, but I would add the word platform for the description because we're talking about an all-encompassing tool. Great point. Totally
we have an option that we've been exploring for about the last 4 or 5 years here at Third Stage, called Platform Select. And it's no longer about just selecting an ERP system. It's about selecting that entire digital enterprise operations picture, right? And moving into a phase 0 that prepares an organization. And we actually call that Platform Select. So I love your idea of thinking about platforms rather than maybe just application sets or systems as well. Yep.
Yeah. Andy, I think this is in reference to when we were talking about the renaming of ERP and digital transformation. Andy on LinkedIn says, exactly. We have been digital for quite some time. And then Middo on YouTube says, functions of an ERP, managing foundational data, integrating disparate business functions and enforcing structured processes remain essential, and AI can be made to act as a powerful layer on top. I often wonder if, do you think ERP systems in general will evolve into more of a true system of record slash database, glorified database, and then AI ends up becoming what ERP used to be in terms of reporting and BI and that sort of thing? Because now if you think about it, you don't necessarily need to, even some of the systems we're using internally at Third Stage, and we see it with our clients too, but even systems we're using now, you've got the conversational AI interface where now I don't have to go into our CRM to run a report to see how many deals you're working on or whatever. I can just ask it, tell me the last 10 deals we closed, or show me the last 10 opportunities that popped into the pipeline or whatever. So is that something you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. I mean, think about this. If you were to look back a year ago and people were talking about ChatGPT, would you have seen that as a tool that would be indispensable to you today? Like I think it is for many people, right? We use it just kind of out of convenience, basically out of a need to really assess things very quickly and put that into writing, especially in emails, things like that. I think the same thing is happening with ERP systems. They've all got a user interface now that is more conversational. That's more like Alexa or Siri, that type of interface. And I think that'll continue to grow and expand, making it easier to essentially analyze your business, get reporting out, do all of the functions that used to be proprietary to that single ERP system. And now you're going to be able to do it through multiple ERP systems, multiple edge solutions within your enterprise. I think that's definitely the way it's going.
Yeah.
And it's growing rapidly. I mean, I said, think about a year ago with ChatGPT, think about a year from now with enterprise systems. They're evolving that quickly. So,
yeah, it's a good way to put it, because I know 2 years ago when I first started using ChatGPT, I thought it was cool, but I didn't fully recognize or realize how ingrained it would be in my day-to-day life. Now I use it, I'd say hourly. I mean, I'd be surprised if there's an hour that goes by in my day that I'm not using ChatGPT or AI in some way, just to, leverage time and effort and things like that. We were talking about the Stratosphere conference. I'm going to see if I can pop it up here. There is a, oops, that is not the one I want to show you. So you should see it now. Yep, it's cut. The text is cut off, but if you scan the QR code, it still works. It says Stratosphere Conf, sort of. But the QR code you see right here on the top left, you can scan that to learn more about our Stratosphere conference that's coming up in Denver. You can also join it virtually too. So wherever in the world you're joining from, you can join virtually, or you can be there in person. So we've got 3 different passes available: the virtual, the regular in-person pass, and then a VIP in-person pass. So be sure to check that out. You can see the agenda, speaker lineup, all that stuff. It's tech agnostic. We talk about all kinds of trends, and it's meant to be something that's not vendor marketing hype and spin. It's meant to be just a no BS agnostic view of the market and things you need to know to be successful. So be sure to check that out. I'll leave that QR code up here for a second so you can scan that. I'm here with Greg Benton. We're talking about the death of ERP software and what some of the alternatives are. We still have a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I don't mind letting you down easy, but just give it time. If it don't hurt now, but just wait.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I want to invite you to join me and other thought leaders in the digital transformation space to Stratosphere 2025. It's an annual conference we've hosted now for 7 years in a row. It's a great event. It's live in Denver, Colorado, but we're also offering it virtually via hybrid tickets. And we're going to have a lot of different speakers here, including myself as a keynote, as well as others that you may know from the industry. And this is a perfect conference if you're interested in any sort of digital transformation, including ERP and CRM and HCM. And actually, the theme for this year's session is AI and how AI is affecting all different types of digital transformation. But in addition to AI, we'll also talk about the fundamentals of digital transformation, including program management, evaluating the right software, digital strategy, change management, process improvement, all the things you need to know to make your project successful. It's also a great way to network and learn from others. So just being part of a community that is also like-minded and going through the same things you are, that's another value. And you can join, like I said, remotely in person, and you can also buy VIP tickets if you'd like more exclusive access to me and others from the third stage team and other speakers that are going to be there. So I hope to see you soon. Check out my discount code below for discounted tickets. You can go to stratosphere2025.com for more information, including the full agenda, and I hope to see you there. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 229. My name is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And this show is produced by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. We're here with Greg Benton. We're talking about the death of ERP software and what some of the alternatives to enterprise technologies might be. Middo continues on that so we may say it will be a smart ERP system. It can never be replaced completely. It's a good way to look at it. Nizaraj, it's Stan. Maybe Stan's I'll say Stan because that's easier for me to pronounce. On YouTube says, I just started my ERP startup in Kenya to serve the local people, currently getting a lot of positive energy. So I think that's an interesting comment because the fact that there's positive energy and interest in something different, I think is probably representative of what's going on in the market.
First step in change management and adoption is getting everyone's interest in moving forward to something new, better. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Or go ahead. Well,
I was going to say this is really interesting. I've not heard this comment before, but Andy on LinkedIn is making the early call here. IBM will pick up SAP. So now that he said that, it's going to be all over the internet. It's going to be all over the internet now that IBM bought SAP. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember this last April Fool's? I don't know if you saw it, but on April Fool's Day, and I totally fell for this. I woke up and I got on LinkedIn just on my phone, and there's a post that had like thousands of likes and it was going viral, and it was saying that Donald Trump had bought SAP. And for a second, I was like, that almost sounds like something he would do. But then it turns out to be an April Fool's joke. So now that Andy is saying that he thinks IBM is going to buy SAP, that'll become the fake news of the day on the internet. But that is an interesting, really interesting comment. You can see that happening actually, because IBM and SAP already are sort of intertwined, and that would actually make a lot of sense.
Very much so. Yeah.
And they both represent the old monolithic guard. So what better way just to put them together? So here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. How do you help stakeholders get on board with changing processes that they may have used for decades? So you talk about all these platforms, ERP systems, open source, all these interoperability, all these new technologies, AI. How do you get people on board with changing those processes when they're just so used to the way things were?
We've got several clients now that are going through this entire process, and the way that we are managing through it is having them look introspectively at the way that they do things today, and realizing that there's a whole lot of manual processes involved. There's a whole lot of inefficiency in the way that they do business, that workflow is conducted across the enterprise. And looking at a future state that is going to manage some of that or reduce some of the waste that goes on with some of those old processes that are still done just because there's tribal knowledge in the organization, just because that's the way it's been done for the last 20 years, and that's the way I was trained to do it. and get them excited about moving into something new, something that's going to be more in keeping with the way that the latest generation of iPhone users, for instance, use applications and data and technology. It's very much in a interactive model, and getting people excited about having something new that they can use in that same way is the way that we get people on board. And then more importantly, really just lead to adoption and continual use and optimization of those systems once in place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and change management is obviously a really important part of all this, and something that needs to be managed no matter what you do, whether you're putting in a new ERP system or one of these other options we're talking about. It's going to be a cultural shift. It's going to be a challenge for you to go through it. And related to that, here's a follow-up question that's very related to that. This is from Surya on YouTube. Surya says, is the death of ERP more about technology limitations, or is it a cultural shift in how organizations view transformation and agility? It's a great question. What do you think?
That's a great question. I think it also goes back to the deployment, to the implementation of systems, and the way that change is managed through the entire process. You've got to have a lot of transparency. You've got to have people at all levels of the organization, and basically your best people that have the subject matter expertise to bring to the project, fully involved with the project, and not getting exhausted in the way that things are being delivered over a period of many years. You have to keep it fresh. You have to make sure that the implementation is well planned, that your end goal is solidly in mind when you're starting the project. And that way you can keep everybody moving in the same direction. You've also got to celebrate quick wins along the way. And I think that in the past, we haven't done that. We've just turned it over to a systems integrator, and they've been off and running with sometimes dozens of consultants doing things in the background. Don't look behind the curtain. And when we're done, we'll hand you the system, and then you'll start using it. You've been doing web-based training and you're off and running. Well, that just rarely works. And that leads to that 70 to 80% of implementations that fail. Much of it is the change management, training, and adoption eventually of the system.
Yeah. Very, very true. And don't look behind the curtain. That's another important phenomena that leads to cost and time overruns with the traditional ERP model, and vendor lock-in, all that stuff. Those are all symptoms of some of those other issues we were talking about. Just a general comment, vendor-specific comment from Middo on YouTube. I may say Oracle Fusion is getting into a smart ERP as I see their progress. Fair comment. Another comment from X about ERP Next. ERP Next has a GitHub repository that allows you to local host, and it's a full version. So interesting comment there. Thanks for your feedback there. Here's a first-time comment today from Rajiv on YouTube. Rajiv says, great conversation. I believe ERP will continue, but various workflow and table structures will undergo change. Some parts will be taken up by AI agents, and the balance will continue with humans.
I love it. Rajiv is obviously a very technical person because he's talking about AI taking over tables.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We need that. We need that technical perspective here.
We need that. We need that.
Because you and I are not the most technical people, so it's good to have people in the audience here that are. Interesting comment here. Follow-up from Rajiv. Microsoft D365 is a platform with a foundation of collaboration. This should get better market share now. Actually agree. I think Microsoft has we don't play favorites here at third stage, but I think their strategy is more suited for where the industry is going. Among others, they're not the only one. I think Oracle in some ways is doing the same. NetSuite, I think, is pivoting really well and in sort of their position in the market.
Epicor as well.
Epicor.
Infor as well.
Yeah.
A lot of these. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you've got to watch these larger tier 2 players like Epicor, Infor, NetSuite. I think they're not only moving up market, but they're
IFS.
IFS. They're just a bit more nimble in terms of how they respond in the offering, the overall solution offering they're providing to their clients. What were you going to say, though? I interrupted you and you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that many of the ERP vendors, whether you call it tier 2 or even quasi tier 1, are definitely tailoring to industry solutions, as well as incorporating AI, machine learning, and some of the other elements that we've been discussing today in their roadmaps going forward. I think that's going to keep them entirely relevant in terms of the discussion of DEO in the future. Whatever we decide to call it, it is all about transformation. It is all about the people and process part of making your organization work in a better way, right? Get to an optimized state and then stay there, kind of that third stage of digital transformation. And there I used the term digital again, didn't I? So
I know it's hard. Old habits die hard, I suppose.
Right. That's right.
Here's a question from Simon on YouTube. Simon says, how do you see microservices / APIs first impacting ERP adoption? Does this look like another accelerator to make ERP systems less monolithic?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, the interoperability layer that we've been talking about with Palantir and Snowflake and Databricks, that API base is basically what connects disparate systems and even the internet to the core ERP to a single source of the truth. And that is a direction that is just kind of in keeping with your question about, is this changing things? Yes, it's rapidly changing things. So
yeah, microservices. I know you mentioned Jan Bond earlier, and that's something he's really big on, is this whole microservices concept too.
Right.
Let's see. Just looking through all the questions and comments. Thank you for all the great questions here. Here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn that I think is a really good one to get into. How does platform differ from a traditional ERP selection? So if you're going through this process, let's just say, we've got clients that are going through this right now where they're trying to figure out what system and or platforms they might want to consider. How do you navigate the two camps in the evaluation process?
Well, the enterprise platforms that we've been talking about, I mean, Salesforce is a great example of an enterprise platform, right? But it's not generally an ERP system. ServiceNow is a platform. The hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, are also platforms that can connect and manage different application sets and different systems on one major platform. So think about looking at digital enterprise operations again. So core ERP plus all of the edge solutions that surround it. Getting those individual platforms and cloud-based solutions, on-premise solutions into a single unified structure is really what we're talking about in terms of the overall platform for an organization.
Right. And then Mecklin from the Third Stage team here on LinkedIn has a similar comment. It's a longer one, so it doesn't all show here, but I'll hit the high points here. I think interoperability platforms will give way to the rise of smaller software vendors because the old guard vendors are too bloated in functionality. I believe the newer software vendors will specialize on specific areas, and then the interoperability platform will allow the user to interact with all the various systems under the same umbrella. So that's where like a Palantir or a Snowflake, for example, comes into play. Is that essentially becomes your front end ERP user interface, and then you've got other systems behind it that it's drawing from, and then it
Right.
layers on AI, reporting, all that stuff. So it feels like you're using one system, but there's multiple systems behind it that are feeding into it. And some might say that's just putting lipstick on a pig, to use a old school phrase or cliche.
That's very old school.
But a lot of people say, well, that's just putting lipstick on a pig. You're not solving the real core problem if you've got old systems that are feeding a more modern, like a Palantir or a Snowflake or whatever. What do you say to that? I mean, is that a good interim solution? Could it be a good long-term solution, or is it just something that's more of a Band-Aid to get you through until you're ready to replace those back-end systems?
No, I know that Mechlin is working with a client that is very forward-looking and moving into this whole interoperability layer in a big way. And one of the questions that came up, especially with the executive team, is: are we creating something that is going to be throwaway in building this out? And the answer is absolutely not. The answer is you're going to be creating a normalized data platform that is then going to be really kind of the basis or the substrate of everything that you're going to be building on top of it. It's going to allow you to do things quickly, get to a return on the value and the investment that you're making in the system. But it's going to persist as you move into replacement of some of the very old systems and processes that are running in the organization today. So no, I don't think that it's something that you put in place as a temporary solution. It's a permanent foundation, if you want to look at it that way.
What about someone who puts in that permanent foundation? Let's just say it's Palantir. I put in Palantir, and let's just say in this hypothetical scenario, I'm using SAP ECC. I'm using an old or not an old version, but I'm using, like, I don't know, Salesforce is my CRM system, and I've got a few different systems. Some of them outdated, some of them more modern than others, whatever. But let's hone in on the SAP side. Like I've got ECC. I decide I'm not going to follow SAP's 2030 deadline. I'm going to leave ECC in place intact in the short term. I'm going to put in Palantir on top, and that's going to become the layer that my employees all interface with. I go live, great. Now I'm using the power of Palantir. Could I at some point in the future say, okay, now it is time for me to rip out ECC because whatever, it's too much customization, it's technical debt. I need to at some point upgrade it. And now I'm going to rip out ECC and put in S/4HANA behind it. Is that a viable strategy? Is that something that companies could be thinking about as a strategy, particularly SAP customers or any other legacy ERP system that they're thinking about upgrading to?
Absolutely. It's a bridge to that change, right? In other words, if you're not going to make the decision today to move from ECC to S4 in this scenario, this gets you the time that is needed to understand exactly what would be the best solution. Maybe it is moving to S4, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's replacing with something else, or maybe it's staying on ECC and working with Rimini Street or some other alternative to continue to keep that moving while you don't make the entire transition to S4. I guess transition is not a good word for that, for the re-implementation or the implementation of S4. And that's a big question in the SAP marketplace, right? Not so much in some of the other ERP vendors where you're moving from the current version to the latest version. They are a lot simpler, smoother path. And not to pick on SAP, but we've seen a lot of headlines lately.
Yeah, so they make it easy to pick on them.
But think of it as a bridge to get to that long-term end state and operating state that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. And this is what SAP doesn't want you to know. There's two things you just shared that SAP does not want you to know. One is they say they're cutting off support in 2030 for ECC. You mentioned Rimini Street. There's others like Spinnaker, third-party SAP support providers that will provide support for ECC at least until 2040. And I imagine they'll probably go even longer. But for right now, they've said they'll support ECC through 2040. So right there's a lifeline that buys you 10 more years. And especially if you've just implemented, we have one client based in Nebraska that we're just starting work with. And they had just finished implementing ECC, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And it was part of a multi-year big global transformation. So it took them a long time to go through it. They finished the implementation like 2 years ago. And they were saying like a year or two before they even finished the implementation, SAP was already breathing down their neck saying, hey, it's time to upgrade to S4HANA. And their view was, wait, our business case is a 7-year business case. We need 7 years of business value to justify this big, massive ECC investment we just made. So no, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to upgrade to S4HANA
We're
right
still
now.
depreciating it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, let us get the value. Let us get our footing on what we just did. We're not going to go through this again. So I think looking at what your lifelines are, and if your lifeline is going to be third-party maintenance, great. If your lifeline might be the second thing that SAP doesn't want you to know, which is put in a Palantir or a Snowflake or some other AI tool that ends up becoming that layer that gives you some immediate value with a lot less time, cost, and risk and heartache to go along with that. So I think that's the way to think about it, is what can we do to mitigate the risk that the vendors are imposing on us, and how can we continue to run our business the way we want to run our business and do it in a way that aligns with our needs, not necessarily that of our software vendor. I think that's the way you've got to think through it and not worry too much about vendor A, B, or C telling you you've got to get off that system because it's old. I mean, honestly, who cares? We still have some clients that are coming to us saying, hey, we're still running an iSeries or an AS400 based homegrown system. I would not advise you. I wouldn't advise you do that, but I'm just saying there's so many companies that they've let it ride. They sweat the assets for 40 years that for some companies, it just makes sense, right? I mean, it's not a terrible thing to use old technology.
Yeah.
The technologists in us all want to say, don't do it. It's old, outdated technology. Move to the cloud, get analytics and BI and all the cool stuff. The technologists in us might think that, but you have to look at it more from the business perspective and say, does it give us value? It sounds cool, but is it going to give us value?
Think about this too in different industries, like PE firms, where you have a portfolio of different businesses that are running different software systems. Like one may be running ECC, another one may be running Oracle or something else. As you're bringing those together under a single corporate umbrella, and you're trying to get insights and information out of all of those businesses and run them as a single entity, this interoperability layer allows you to continue to keep those somewhat independent businesses running on that software system that works for them, right? Over a longer period of time. So reducing change, reducing risk. This is a new way of bridging to that true transformation for organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting question from X again. The question is, with AI changing the face of technology, should we expect to see more startups, and how can ERP help? So do you think there's more tech startups that are forthcoming given the trends and the changes and the seismic shifts in the market that we're seeing right now?
Oh, I think you will agree, Eric. The advent of AI, machine learning, is really just creating a whole new industry surrounding AI. Some of the proprietary tools that we use are different constructs, different, and allowing for a different methodology than we'd even thought of 2 years ago. So even third stage is evolving as we create our own intellectual property surrounding these tools. That's going to cause proliferation of new businesses coming in with new capabilities to address problems and gaps that we've seen in the past with enterprise systems and deployments. Deployments in months instead of years has been the target of moving to the cloud and moving to multi-tenant structures for years and years. But now you add robotic automation for testing, for instance, in implementations and things like that. It's going to speed implementations. It's going to cause a whole new marketplace of ecosystem partners that are available to people that use these tools.
Yeah. I'd say now is a really good time to start. And if you're going to do a startup, whether it's ERP or something related to enterprise tech, now is a really good time because you can leverage AI, first of all, to build the software. So, the barriers to entry are lower than they've ever been. And second of all, one thing we see in the space is this lack of trust and this distrust of the enterprise technology incumbents. these big ERP software vendors haven't done themselves any favors by the way they've gone about the migration to the cloud, in the forced migrations and the sunsetting, the arbitrary sunset dates, and will they or won't they cut off support for their product that we're already paying for. It's their prerogative to do it, the software vendors, but it's creating a huge amount of distrust in the market right now. And I think companies are clamoring for alternatives. And so that's part of why our company has done so well at Third Stage, is because we're agnostic. We're not drinking the Kool-Aid. We're not shoving technology down anyone's throat. And we're just there to be our trusted advisor to our clients. And it's a trust thing. I always tell our team when we're, onboarding people or having our leadership meetings, it's about, we're selling trust is what we're selling. We're not selling technology or even technology services. It's trust. And so I think if you can create an ERP system that addresses that and provides an alternative and a lower cost, higher value sort of solution, you look at, for example, Odoo recently, I think in the last year or so, just got a big $500 million investment from Google's parent company. And among others, I think there were several investors. But point being, they're not that old of a company. They're newer company. They're different, and they're getting these huge valuations. Now, to be fair, SAP's stock price is doing really well. I mean, their stock price is doing great for investors, largely because they're starting to see fruits of their labor of shifting so many customers to the cloud. And investors know there's still a lot more that still need to shift to the cloud, and the more that are going to shift to the cloud, the better the stock price is going to do, and the better the executives are going to get comped on that. So anyway, so I don't know what your thoughts are there, but I feel like now is a good time to, if you're going to start an ERP software company or provider, I think now would be a great time.
I think for all the reasons you mentioned, and the fact that everyone is going to have to be determining where they are going to go and how they are going to get there over the next 2 to 3 years. You mentioned SAP. All of the ERP vendors are moving everyone to their cloud-based solution if they weren't native cloud already. That is causing, just a dam burst in terms of organizations that are looking to make that move and to deploy resources to make it happen. And so it's becoming a very crowded marketplace. Anyone that can bring tools to bear that are going to simplify that are going to streamline it, are going to do very well. So yeah, now is the time to act.
Yeah. I've got to stop for a second here. This is the first, so I've been doing these podcasts now for like 4.5 years. This is the first conversation where I completely lost track of time. I had no idea that it's already been an hour. So quick time check. Are you okay? Do you have a hard stopper in it? Do you have a meeting you're late for right now?
I don't. No.
Can we go a couple more minutes here? Because there's a couple really good questions I want to get to. And
this is not going to make a very brief podcast though. So.
I know. I swore we were about 30 minutes in. I wasn't even.
I've never seen this many questions coming across on the chat.
I know, and some really good ones just came in that we just
can't. Not even questions. People interacting with the conversation.
Yeah, and I had about a dozen questions for you. I think I've gotten through 2 of them, but because these are such great questions. So here's a kind of a funny comment from William on YouTube. William, this is back to the comment when we were talking about Donald Trump buying SAP is the April Fool's joke. William clarifies and says it was actually Stormy Daniels who bought SAP career. A little inside humor for those that follow American politics and controversies. Here's the question I really want to get to, though. This is from John Reed, who I'm a big fan of. He's with Diginomica. If you don't know him, he's joining on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining, John. John says modern ERP isn't dead. What is dead is over-customized legacy ERP, which is very difficult to embed with AI and analytics. The future is industry-based platforms on which to perform innovations. Modern SaaS software plays a big role here because AI requires this type of data and is pretty dumb without that data. It's well said and a good kind of a clarification of this whole thing we're talking about. Because I think, we're saying, is ERP software dead? Yes or no? The real answer is maybe somewhere in between. And I think he does a great job of explaining what that in between is. If it's over customized, bloated, inflexible, that part's dead. But ERP as a category probably isn't going anywhere anytime soon, especially if they can get their stuff together and
No, you
provide?
think about the business functions that are controlled by enterprise resource planning, right? Those core functions still need to go on. The interoperability platforms that we're talking about, mission control over the whole thing, has to have a living host. It has to have that data and information brought up so that it can be normalized in a data lake environment and then mined through business intelligence tools. That's the way the whole thing comes together and works. So no, ERP is not going to go away. Those core critical functions are not going to go away. But can they be integrated in that entire digital enterprise operations picture? And importantly, can you deploy this over a period of time? So can you get to some quick wins with the bridge to this interoperability layer or foundation that you put in place, the mission control, and then build out the rest of the systems over time in the proper sequence? So moving from ECC to something else in 5 years rather than that immediately. That's the picture for the next 5 to 10 years that we're trying to draw here. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. Just a couple of comments here, and then I'm going to get to a sort of a capstone wrap up question here. But
probably need to.
yeah, at some point we have to. I mean, we could go for hours here with all the great questions here. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, but here's just a comment I think is interesting. That this is from Hesham on YouTube. Hesham says AI is learning supersonic fast, especially from large vendors, and soon will provide new ERP solutions with open source and very cheap. That is something. This is a good point. Actually, this is something you do have to look at. Is one of the advantages that the big vendors have, these incumbent vendors like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, is that when, like, for example, SAP and John, actually, if John's still on, John Reed, he can probably check me on this because he follows the SAP space so closely. But last I heard, I think it was like 30,000 SAP customers had opted in to train the SAP AI models, or to use their data to train the models. So on one hand, that's a lot of power. I mean, that's a smart AI. That's a potentially really smart AI solution, because you think of the world's largest companies using SAP and using their data, their mass amounts of transactional data to train an AI model. I mean, that's pretty powerful. Now the question becomes, is that power worth the trade-off of the fact that now you're sort of maybe leveling the playing field too much? All your competitors now are using the same AI model that you helped train. And I mean, that becomes a whole nother conversation. And then of course you've got the data privacy and intellectual property issues, which that's going to take decades to sort that out in courts and whatnot. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the big vendors have an advantage over the smaller ones when it comes to AI models? And what are your thoughts?
I think they do, because you just think about literally billions of dollars being invested in upgrading systems, and now the continuous upgrading that's available through multi-tenant environments, where the one-to-many model, everyone gets the same upgrades, everyone gets the same changes. And they've also been paying a lot of attention, and this is to the a nod to the ERP major vendors. They've really been asking their customers, their constituents, what do you need to see from us? And a lot of the answers have been coming back as AI flexibility tools that I can configure my systems on top of core ERP and so forth going forward. And they've listened, and they've created the ability and the tools to make that entirely possible. So when you look at spending billions of dollars, I mean, look what Oracle has done in the last couple of months in terms of their stock price. A lot of that is based upon their database sales, but it's also their enterprise sales just gone through the roof, making Larry Ellison the second richest man in the world. So the big ERPs do have an advantage in this, and there is going to be a lot of consolidation.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about vendor lock and also the fact that switching costs are so high. Moving off your old ERP system just gets more and more difficult over time. So the big vendors do have that advantage too, which is, for example, you look at PepsiCo. I was just reading about Pepsi and how they're doing all this AI stuff. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago about this. They're doing all this AI stuff with Salesforce, but they use SAP as well. And you think about these big, massive Fortune 500 companies that are using SAP. I mean, you're not just gonna think about the ripping out SAP to put in Oracle, or ripping out Oracle to put in SAP at a big Fortune 500 company. It's super hard to do, which is why you build this knowledge base around a certain vendor, and then you end up upgrading and staying with that vendor for a long time, and the big vendors know it. So to be fair, there's not a whole lot of options for these or historically there haven't been a lot of options for these really big companies, but Palantir is an example, and Snowflake too. They're getting some really big clients. I mean, there's some big companies that are using Palantir. I mean, big, not just private sector, but public sector too. In the case of Palantir, big government organizations, huge government entities, federal governments are using Palantir along with all their legacy systems that they don't want to replace or they can't replace.
Not to promote Accenture, but Accenture and Palantir just announced a partnership like yesterday to develop enterprise operations for government agencies.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And Palantir also has a partnership with SAP. SAP just announced that at Sapphire as well. So we could talk for hours, and I wish we could, but we can't. But just to sort of wrap it up or bring this all full circle, if you were advising a board of directors and a management team, which you do this every day, so this isn't just hypothetical, but if you were today advising a board of directors or a leadership team that's trying to future-proof their digital strategy, what would your closing remarks be in terms of the pros and cons or the considerations when you're looking at ERP versus alternative options as it stands right now?
Well, pick partners that will persist. So understand exactly what your ERP vendor roadmaps entail, and also take those alternatives with a little bit of a grain of salt, understanding that you're going to have to do a lot of development work kind of internally with your teams, getting everyone on board with making the changes. So it really requires that upfront phase 0 that prepares the organization to move forward in a single direction. Everyone behind the same banner, everyone behind the same flag. Without that, you just can't get to an end state that is going to give a return on investment and a return on the work that needs to go into this, and then be fully adopted by your entire organization. So that would be my advice in closing statement, and it often has been the closing statement. You got to start with the end in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate your time, and appreciate all the great audience questions as well. So many good threads we didn't get into beyond what we already did. So we're going to cover a couple of those threads here when we come back from a quick break. We'll take the break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Tell me what you've got to say. Tell me, I've been waiting for so long.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 229. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Greg on the show. Great conversation with him and the audience talking about the death of ERP software and what some of the alternatives ERP might be in some cases. What were your thoughts, questions, takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it at the end. I feel like the conversation just flew by. I thought that you and Greg both had a lot of great insights, and it's just such a interesting topic that a lot of people have different opinions on. So it's really interesting to see what the audience had to say and what you and Greg were talking about today. I do have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Eric. First one being, if you're advising a startup today, what gaps in the ERP market would you tell them to solve first?
If I was advising an ERP startup, that's a great question. I think I would say pick a niche that's underserved. And as a use case or a case study, a historic case study, I would go back and look at what Salesforce did, for example, or Workday. Those are two really good examples. They didn't focus on a specific industry. They focused on a specific function that ERP was not handling well or not well enough for some companies. So Workday, in the case of human capital management, they said we can provide a system that's much better at human capital management than the average ERP system's HR module might be able to perform. And Salesforce did the same for CRM. And I think that's the beauty of this industry is technology is changing so fast that on one hand, you have the consolidation of ERP vendors who are trying to bring together all these different functions. They're trying to be everything to everyone. In some cases, they come close to succeeding. In some cases, they fail miserably. But then as they're doing that, then it creates this vacuum of opportunity and gaps. You know, there's always going to be these gaps that these big ERP providers can't satisfy, whether it's a function or a niche industry. So if I look at the industry side of things, you look at companies like Plex Systems. They do a lot of work in the automotive industry. So they've got, there's lots of manufacturing systems out there, but there weren't many, or there haven't been many that satisfy the needs adequately for a lot of automotive suppliers. So Plex created a system that could handle that. You have Just Food ERP. It's a ERP system built on the Microsoft platform that is tailored just for food manufacturing companies, food and beverage. So those are just two examples of these niches where someone knew the space really well. They recognized that ERP, the big ERP system providers weren't providing enough depth in that area. So they come along and provide a better mousetrap for that. So I that's what I would do is I would look at maybe not so much the functional areas, because I think the functional areas are fairly well addressed, but the industry specific functionality, I don't think is. So I would look at all the different industries, especially if there's certain ones really well. And I would look at that industry and say, where are these ERP providers not satisfying, and what kind of solution could I provide that's either a standalone ERP system that satisfies that industry, or it could be that you create a third-party bolt-on that's meant to play nice with a bigger ERP system, but it satisfies the needs of that market. So I would just look at what where the gaps are in an industry, and then go attack it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. One last question. The question is, if modern ERP isn't dead, but legacy ERP is, what's the single most important step to transition to modern?
I think just having a deliberate plan and a strategy and areas of focus, because it's easy to get lost in the landscape and the jungle of ERP, because ERP systems in general, especially the bigger software vendors, they're so big and complex, so they can do so many different things. there's so many modules and add-ons, and it's easy to overspend and overcomplicate your technology stack if you don't have a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish and what your priorities are. So I would just say take the time up front to really get clarity around what you want. Don't lead with the technology. Don't lead with the software vendors. Lead with more of an objective, agnostic view of what it is you need, and let that inform and drive your decisions. And that's why clients hire us, for example, is because we're independent, we're tech agnostic, we don't sell software, we're not affiliated with any of these vendors, and we don't really care what software a company does or doesn't use. So I think taking that approach is for sure, what I'd consider best practice, or the thing that's going to lead you most to success.
Yeah, absolutely. But what a great conversation between you and Greg and the audience. It was really insightful today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fun conversation, and we're gonna roll right into the next segment, which builds on the conversation we just had with Greg and the audience around ERP potentially being dead or potentially dying, or at the very least, there are options to traditional monolithic ERP systems out there that you should consider. And so what I want to do in this next segment is talk about the dark side of ERP. These are the things I don't like about ERP software. And it's not meant to be strictly just a rant, what a friend of mine called rage bait. He said he put out a lot of rage bait, which I don't think I'm an angry person, but apparently I think he was kidding, but still. It's not meant to be overly negative, but it is meant to draw out the dark side of ERP systems and the things you need to be aware of. So let's roll this clip, and we'll come back and chat about what you think, Darian, as well as I'd love to hear the comments from the audience as we're rolling this clip, which is a video clip that I've recently posted on my YouTube channel. The first reason why you may not like ERP software like me is the fact that a lot of ERP systems, if not most of them, are monolithic and cumbersome. And what I mean by that is they're outdated. They're big, large, transactional-based technologies that are meant to house a lot of transactional information. It's meant to integrate data and workflows across organizations and different workflows. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult for these big, massive systems to keep up with the changes that most businesses require. Now, software vendors listening and other consultants in the space might argue, well, but these big software vendors have a lot of R&D dollars to invest in making the software better. And that is true. They do have a lot of money to invest in new technology. But the downside is that these technologies simply cannot change fast enough to keep up with the changing dynamics of the world around us. And this is especially true for organizations that are going through their own unique individual changes. It's quite literally impossible for any organization to continue to grow and change and evolve as it needs to, and for the ERP system to keep up with that change. So these are some of the challenges that need to be considered, and that fact that a lot of ERP systems are monolithic and cumbersome is something you should keep in mind and make sure that you're considering or evaluating as part of your ERP software selection process. Another reason why I dislike ERP software at times is the fact that they can be very expensive and very risky propositions for organizations. Now, when we're evaluating potential ERP systems, we're always looking at the potential upside, the potential ROI, the benefits, the business value that the ERP software can provide. And while those benefits are real, or the potential benefits are real, the other reality is that these propositions, these implementations are expensive and risky. The reason for this isn't because there's something inherently wrong with ERP software. The real reason is because ERP systems are broad, largely integrated systems that affect an entire organization. So in other words, you're not just putting a small part of your business at risk. Chances are pretty high you're putting your entire business at risk, or at least a large subset of your organization. And that's both the blessing and the curse of ERP software, is that they're fully integrated systems. They can handle end-to-end business processes and workflows, but the downside is now you're putting those end-to-end business processes and workflows at risk. If there's a problem with the way you've implemented the solution, it becomes much more than a technical problem. It becomes a budgetary problem, because you're likely to spend a lot more time and money getting the system to do what you want it to do. But perhaps even more importantly, you're also putting your operations at risk. This is a dirty little secret that the industry doesn't like to talk about, but the reality is most organizations lose a lot of money, not just in the money they spend on investing in the implementation, but in the operational disruption that happens after implementation goes live. According to our research, just over 50% of organizations that implement new ERP software experience some sort of material operational disruption, meaning they can't close the books, they can't run payroll, they can't ship product, or some other major showstopper for their operations. And these disruptions cost a lot of money. In many cases,
these disruptions cost exponentially more than the actual implementation itself. And that risk and that cost is something that's very real and needs to be considered. And that's a reason why ERP systems have such a bad rap in the industry today. Another reason why I dislike ERP systems at times is because ERP systems are trying to be everything to everyone. In other words, they're trying to provide functionality and capabilities and workflows that meet the needs of multiple industries and multiple organizations within each of those industries. And this is something that is simply not possible. Now, it's appealing to software vendors to want to do this because obviously they can sell more software, they can achieve more scale by achieving more functionality and capabilities. But the reality is, most organizations have differences and competitive advantages and things that they're trying to do differently that they don't necessarily want to find out of an off-the-shelf, out-of-the-box ERP system. Let's take an example to talk about how an ERP system runs into constraints in its own functionality when you look at different types of organizations. Let's just say you have a retail organization where you're selling high volumes of product to your customers. That is a distribution volume-based game that requires certain types of business processes that are very unique to the retail industry. Let's compare that to a complex engineer order manufacturing organization that makes really big, expensive, low volume, complex products. That's a very different business model, a different set of business processes and workflows and data requirements that are very different than the retail example I gave. But yet, most ERP vendors are trying to sell their software to these multiple disparate industries. And even if you find a solution that's focused on just one industry or a small subset of industries, even in those cases, you find that your needs and your competitive advantages are going to be different than your peers. Not to say all of the functionality is not a good fit for you, but chances are pretty high you're going to have trouble fitting into an ERP system that's trying to be everything to everyone. So that's one thing to consider, and that's one of the big limitations of ERP systems is that they simply cannot be everything to everyone across multiple industries. For the 25 years I've been in this industry, I've noticed and observed that ERP systems deliver questionable business value. ERP failure rates are very high, and even when the failure is not a massive failure, chances are pretty high that you're not getting the business value that you expect out of the system. And that's been a problem that's been plaguing the industry for 25 years. To be fair, oftentimes this isn't a result of the software, a problem with the software. It's because organizations don't want to change, they don't want to improve their businesses, and they don't take advantage of the capabilities available to them in the ERP software. However, a lot of the time, it's because there are limitations in the ERP systems. There's complexities in the system. There's functionality that is too cumbersome for the organization, or just simply the organization runs out of budget because the initial implementation was so expensive that they didn't get to implement all the modules that they needed. So there's a lot of different reasons why this is, but at the end of the day, most organizations fail to achieve the business value that they expected to see out of their ERP investments. While ERP customers oftentimes struggle to get the business value they want out of the system, there's two parties in this whole thing that are almost guaranteed to get business value out of ERP investments. And those two parties are the software vendors themselves, as well as the system integrators or the technical consultants that are involved with deploying the software. Those groups of people are almost guaranteed to get business value out of your investments in ERP software. The question becomes, though, what kind of business value are you getting? Are you getting comparable business value that you'd expect to see out of the system? Are you spending a reasonable amount of time and money on the implementation? Are you getting the ROI you expected to see on the deployment? These are all questions you have to ask yourself and really make sure that you right-size the project plan, the strategy, the investments you make, the products you select and choose and implement. Those are all questions you have to ask yourself to make sure that you're not just going all in and blindly investing and doubling down on ERP software that may not deliver business value to you, but they only deliver business value to the consultants and vendors that are providing the service to you. So these are some of the reasons why I dislike ERP software at times. I'm not planning on going anywhere. I love the work that I do, but at times ERP software drives me crazy. I have a love-hate relationship with it and with the industry, and that's why I've committed my career to helping organizations make better decisions and be smarter about how they deploy ERP software in a way that makes sense for them as an organization.
So Darian, that was a clip of my YouTube video that I recently published that talks about why I hate ERP systems and what some of the dark side of ERP systems are. What were your thoughts or questions from that video?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was really insightful again. But I think it kind of can reshape what people think about how their team can collaborate, innovate, and experience their work on the day to day. The first point kind of that you made was that the culture is kind of an afterthought. I thought that was a great point, because companies oftentimes can focus on so much efficiency, growth, and technology that they forget, the human side of things. But if the culture is misaligned, then even the best technology and ERP systems or whatever technology you use is going to fail. So with that being so known out there, at least from you saying it over and over again, and we hear it from other people in the industry, why do you think it still so often gets ignored?
It's just, I think technology, first of all, is something that you can see and touch and feel, and culture is not. So you can demo for me how a software is going to work. I can see it. I could even maybe go play with it and enter data and try it out myself. But when you start talking culture and change management and human dynamics and people, you can't see and touch that nearly as easily, and it doesn't make as much sense, intuitively. So that's part of it. The other part of it is technology is super cool. I think it's changing very quickly, and it's becoming just unbelievable what it can do. And so it's easy. I get enamored by technology at times too. So I think it's human nature that we're excited about it, and it looks super cool. And in many cases, it is super cool. It doesn't necessarily mean though that it's going to transform your business and that everyone's going to go through a digital transformation and end the day thinking like, wow, I really like change, and I'm really glad we went through that entire transformation. At the time, it's painful for organizations, no matter how cool the technology is, no matter how powerful or how much business value it's eventually going to deliver potentially. The journey to get there is really difficult, and people just don't see it because the technology is so cool. How hard can it be, for example, to get everyone to use Copilot to start doing half their jobs for them? Sounds good in theory, but getting 1,000 or 10,000 employees to do that is a totally different story. So I think that's the big challenge companies face.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of build on your point of like technology is cool and switch gears a little bit, what tool, I know you talked about like the 5 key ways that tech shapes culture, and one of those was the employee experience. So what tool do you think resonates specifically with the younger workforce, and how does that tie to retention within companies?
Great question, because you put in a younger worker to use a really old system where you're required to memorize transaction codes or complicated menu paths. That's not a recipe to retain a younger employee who's never seen that before. So a lot of us older people and Gen X like me, or baby boomers, whatever, a lot of us are just we know what it is, so we're kind of used to it. We know that there's transaction codes you might have to remember on these old systems. But you get a 25-year-old walking in the door, they're not even going to know what that means. So it's almost like trying to teach them a foreign language on the job, on the spot. So that's not a good way to attract people. Definitely not a good way to retain them either. Even for older people, I think older people are getting tired of that old look and feel of systems too. So I think having looking at user experience, employee experience is really important. So I think conversational AI is a great tool that people, sort of a universal thing that anyone at any age or stage in their career can pretty easily learn, because all you have to know is what you're looking for. I am looking for a report of, show me a report of all the work in progress at this factory in Birmingham, Alabama, or whatever it is. So those are as long as you know what you're looking for, now all of a sudden you don't need to memorize where to find it. You can just ask AI to do it. So I'm not saying that's the key to keeping employees, but it's certainly the key to not frustrating them and making them more likely to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting point for sure. But yeah, what a great episode today. I feel like hopefully nobody's rage baited by it, but
right.
I think it was great.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear, if you haven't already, drop in the comments, what do you think about ERP software? What does the future hold? Is it dead? Is it dying? Is it alive and well? Long live ERP. Love to hear where you stand, because I don't think there's a clear answer here, and I love hearing all the differing opinions, including what we've already heard. But if you haven't already, love to hear it in the chat here, and we'll pick up some of these comments to chat about in a future episode as well. So thank you for a great episode, Darian. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. Thanks to Greg Benton for being here today. And thank you to our sponsor, Third Stage Consulting Group. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage, go to thirdstage-consulting.com. I've also included my contact information below if you want to brainstorm ideas related to your digital strategy or how you can approach your digital strategy or remediate a project that's off track, help you evaluate software, whatever it is, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have an informal sounding board conversation with you. My email address is in the comments or the description field below. So hope you have a great day, and we'll see you in the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.